Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here live. We've got a very important show today because America is really at a crossroads, I think, of corruption. Of course, it was probably less than 2 weeks ago that Alex had Colonel Pete Martino in here, retired Marine Colonel, and he was talking about how the real issue before America that impinges upon all of these other issues, whether it's the police state or the drug war, is really an issue of corruption. And I think this is really brought to the forefront now here in a story that's breaking here in Austin about the indictment of Governor Perry here. This is 2 felony accounts that they're coming at him with. It was a story of local corruption a year ago. And we're going to show those of you who weren't following this. I think we covered it a little bit, just talking about how outrageous it was that we could have the highest law enforcement agent in the county behave this way and refuse to resign. Strictly because of political reasons, the Democrat Party is supporting her, keeping her in office, even though it reveals some very, very troubling character issues with this district attorney, who is actually in charge of the state public integrity unit. LOL. I guess they need to put that in back of it instead of like LLC. I guess if she's in charge of it, they ought to call it public integrity unit, comma, LOL. Because she was getting $7.5 million of state funds, and Rick Perry said, if you're going to do that, we're going to have somebody who actually hasn't damaged their integrity publicly. We're going to be talking about that in the next segment. We've got clips of that coming up for you.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. And now you can protect yourself from corrupt cops with the InfoWars dash cam. It's your car's black box that records all that the driver sees and hears. And introducing the Block It Pocket. It renders your phone undetectable while protecting your private data and your health. Or take back your privacy and protect your personal information by getting your very own Detractor cell phone pouch. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
Late on Friday, there was breaking news that Governor Rick Perry has been indicted for abuse of office and for coercion. Yes, it's a story about corruption, but that's not the story. I think the real story is the corruption that is encouraged and tolerated because it can result in political gain. And what we see with what was it was a local story, I guess about a month, it was 4 months ago, a year, it was back in April of 2013. That the district attorney here in Travis County, the highest ranking law enforcement official here in Travis County and in the state, was convicted of drunk driving. And what happened there, it wasn't just a single drunk driving conviction, but it was the way that it happened. And I want to play for you a short tape of this. And if you're watching this, you can see the B-roll of how she reacted once she was arrested for drunk driving. Here's a little clip.
And you're going to ruin my career.
That's not the intent of what I am here for.
And I just
now that clip is she just keeps going on about her career. She can barely stand up. You don't see it in that clip right there, but we have some other clips where there's a very long, about a 15-minute video that they recorded on the police car dash cam, and she was staggering so much that both officers had to help her. Now, they didn't pull her over. She was reported to the police by a motorist. It was so bad. She was going across the lanes. She was actually 3 times the legal limit. And she had an open bottle of vodka in the car. She told the police that she'd had some vodka. Later, she changed her story, saying that she'd had a few glasses of wine while she was watching a movie. Maybe both of those are true. I don't know. But she got very abusive. As you can see in this B-roll that we've been running here, she got so abusive in the jail, so violent, that they had to constrain her. She just kept shouting about her career. You're doing this to my career. Absolutely no concern about the danger that she put people in on the road, simply concerned about her career. And of course, the Democrats did not want her to step down. Even though it was very embarrassing for her and for the Democrats to stand behind her, they didn't want Perry to appoint a Republican in her place. So instead, they stood with the corruption because it suited their power play. It was purely political that they stood with her. Now, the interesting thing about this, and where this comes into charges against Governor Perry, is that she was in charge of a state fund where she had $7.5 million as part of the, quote, public integrity unit. That's right, somebody who was screaming abusively at the people in jail, so much so that they had to constrain her, who was picked up for 3 times the legal limit and didn't have the integrity to step down. Instead, she wanted to run this office and have the public trust. And they were getting $7.5 million worth of state funds. So Perry said, basically, either she steps down or I'm not going to give state funds to that organization. Instead, what they have now done is come against Rick Perry and charge him with felonies for exercising his gubernatorial veto, what he has a legitimate right to do. Now, just before we came up to the break, we were talking about what's going on here and the corruption that we see in government. And, of course, the corruption of our police forces by militarizing them, the corruption that comes from not understanding, as retired Colonel Pete Martino said, not understanding the mission statement. Well, the mission statement is laid out pretty clearly in the Constitution as to what the government is supposed to do. So it starts from the top down. It starts from the federal government down. But we also see that it is now moving up from a local story here in Austin to a national story, as what began last April. I guess it was about a year and 4 months ago. There was a drunk driving arrest of the district attorney here who happened to be in charge of the state public integrity unit that got $7.5 million from the state government. And it was such an egregious arrest. It was videotaped both by the dash cam of the police and also because she was so abusive, physically, verbally, in the jail that they began videotaping it. That all eventually came out. It was a local story at first, but then she refused to stand down when Governor Perry tried to get her to resign. Of course, she didn't have enough integrity to resign. The Democrat Party didn't want her to resign because they wanted the power. They didn't care what kind of person was in charge. And this is what they've used that organization for in the past. This is from the Washington Post, and of course, they make it sound as if Governor Perry defunded her entire department. Of course, she's district attorney for the county, but it was the public integrity unit that was not going to get $7.5 million of state money. They say that her predecessor indicted then Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who was a Republican, and he was a Democrat, for allegedly misusing state resources when she was state treasurer. They say, and this is a Washington Post reporting, the prosecution crumbled on the first day of the trial. This same guy, the predecessor of Rosemary Lindbergh, his name is Ronnie Earl, he also brought a case against then House Whip Tom DeLay, again another national story, for violations of Texas campaign finance laws. He got a conviction, but that conviction was overturned. Now we have Rosemary Lindbergh, who, even though she had this egregious incident as a drunken driver, as she was 3 times the legal limit, she was given 45 days in jail, only served half that time. Her license was suspended for 6 months. And as a person in charge of the public integrity unit, Rick Perry wanted her to step down. But instead of doing that, she is fighting back. And they got an indictment against Rick Perry, charging him with coercion and abuse of office because he vetoed the funding for that organization. Now, there are things that they could come after Rick Perry for, probably, like the Gardasil connection. We've talked about that many times, how they were trying to make it mandatory in the schools for all the children to have Gardasil. And, of course, there were ethical connections to people who had been on Rick Perry's staff that now worked for the company that made Gardasil. An egregious civil liberties violation, and one where you could make some connections. But, of course, that wasn't investigated by their office. No, that wasn't investigated. And, of course, you have the situations where the Clintons are collecting hundreds of millions of dollars in speeches, typically getting $250,000 for each speech. And, of course, there was an article in the Las Vegas Review that just came out, said, high fashion and expense for Hillary travel. I guess you could file this under the Devil Wears Prada. They say she insists on staying in presidential suites of luxury hotels whenever she speaks, including when she's coming to Las Vegas. She usually requires those who pay her six-figure fees for speeches to also provide a private jet for transportation. Only a $39 million 16-passenger Gulfstream or larger will do. And then, of course, she makes demands about how she will stay at the event no longer than 90 minutes. She will pose for no more than 50 photos with no more than 100 people. She won't allow any press coverage or video or audio taping of her speech. The only record will be by a stenographer whose transcription will be given only to Mrs. Clinton. And the stenographer's $1,250 bill, of course, will go to the University of Las Vegas in this particular incident, where she's getting paid $250,000 to speak to them. This is an event where she's getting paid $250,000, and they have many corporations who are paying for $20,000 tables. Corporations like Bank of America, Barnes & Noble, Barrick Gold, Wells Fargo, that type of thing. When you see these kind of extravagant speakers' fees, when you see these extravagant prices being paid for people to get close to them, this is nothing but money laundering of political influence. It is a kind of corruption that ought to be truly investigated. Instead, they're charging Rick Perry with felony violations because he tried to get this drunken DA to stand down from being ahead of the Public Integrity Office. That's amazing. That's where we are. Instead of having any integrity, they come after the people who try to stop some of it. And again, like I said, Rick Perry is not somebody that I agree with on everything. On many issues, I have a lot of disagreements with Rick Perry, and I think there may be some ethical issues, but it certainly isn't this one.
You are watching the best of the Alex Jones Show, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. Watch live at Infowars.com/show or become a member of InfoWarsNews.com and help us take resistance to the next level.